Financial Planner, Flow on YouTube.
Okay, today you are in for a treat. We have Steve Blue here. He is the president and CEO of Miller Ingenuity. He is an internationally recognized business transformation expert, as well as a media contributor, four-time author, and a dynamic keynote speaker. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Well, thanks, Alton. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is really great. Steve, you have such a strong background, and I know that you have so much to offer our audience today. But if you don't mind, just fill in a few of the holes that I left out on that intro.
Sure. Well, I've been in leadership positions for nearly 40 years now, and I've been in every situation that anybody in your audience can imagine. I've done startups. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been involved in turnarounds. I've worked for Fortune 500 companies as an executive. I worked for small publishing houses. I started an internet broadcasting company before internet broadcasting was trendy about 25 years ago, and did the first actual television broadcast out of Havana, Cuba.
Oh, wow. And that's awesome.
So I've been, in every kind of conceivable situation anybody can imagine. So I can relate to your audience because wherever they are right now, I've been there.
That's great. That's great. Well, I know that you focus a lot of your efforts on, helping executives and also students and helping people grow their business. And I think a lot of that is centered around kind of self-improvement and growing ourselves, making changes. If you don't mind, just talk a little bit about that and why is it so important that we grow? And also, why is it that we need help to grow?
Well, you hit the nail right on the head before this broadcast started when you said if you don't get the self-development part down right, nothing else flows. And I agree with that completely. I can give you two words that sums up my philosophy and my outlook and my experience with self-development. And those two words are Anthony Robbins.
Sure.
You've heard of him, I presume, right?
Most definitely.
People have. I have done the fire walk not once. That would be easy. Anybody could do it once. I've done it 5 times.
Wow.
And I could tell you every time I did it, Alton, I was just as scared as I was the time before. I never got to the situation where it's like, this firewalk stuff's easy. I know I'm not going to get hurt. I can do it. I've done it 3 times before. It was just as scary the first time as it was the first 4 times. And of course, the firewalk is a metaphor for self-limiting beliefs. If you believe that you can't walk across fire, a 2,000 degree hot coal fire without getting burned, and then you do, all of a sudden you say to yourself, what else do I think I can't do that I actually can? So when I started down my self-development path with all the giants in the industry, Jay Abraham, who was probably the giant of marketing,
sure,
Tony Alessandra, Anthony Robbins, Brian Tracy, and I sucked up everything they had, and I read everything they ever wrote. And particularly with Tony Robbins, I did every program that he had. I went to every seminar that he did, and if he had a program that said, here's how you can get better in the next 30 days, by God, I'd buy it and I'd do it. I wouldn't just read it, I'd actually do it. The one thing I want to say to your listeners about self-development, I talked earlier today about this. In those days, Tony would have you do this program where you set your goals at a certain part in the program. It's like halfway through.
Right.
And you've heard the expression, I'll bet, Alton, many times is, set your goals really high. Set them higher than you think you can make. Set them very lofty because, better to miss a lofty goal than to hit a teeny one. Sure. You've heard that.
Sure.
Well, in those days, I set what I really consider were very, very lofty goals. I didn't, I had a $60,000 house with a big mortgage on it. I wasn't making that much money. And so, I set my goals for a $500,000 house with an in-ground pool and a CEO making tons of money and all that kind of stuff. And when I looked back at those goals, Alton, I found that they weren't big enough because I blew by all of them, every single one of them. And it's like, wow. So if I could leave something with your listeners, and this just in my head right now, is whatever you think your goals are, you're not thinking big enough. You should think better.
Yeah. Yeah. 10X, right?
10X, exactly right. Have you read that book?
I haven't, but I do.
It's a good book.
I do follow him on Instagram, and so I'm pretty familiar with the concept there.
Yeah, you should get the audio version too, because he narrates the audio version, and it's just really interesting to hear him talk about what 10X is and what it means and how you ought to employ it. And it's an interesting fellow.
For sure. I think one of the most recent things that I saw was him. He was riding a bicycle around his private jet, and then it like cuts away to him. I think he's like sitting up on the top of the fuselage, on the top of one of the engines. He's like, you can't do this if you rent a jet. You have to buy your own. And so
I suppose that's true.
It's just a good example, I think, of what you're saying, of just really setting those goals so high. So tell me, why is it that you've dedicated so much time to trying to help other people? I mean, clearly you've focused a lot on yourself and developing yourself, but what is it that makes you so passionate about helping other people do the same?
Well, I would say a couple of things. I hate when I see waste. I hate when I see inefficiency. I hate when I see things that could be improved and nobody's doing anything about it. I just hate that. It's just part of me that I have to. It's like the guy that always has to straighten up the picture because it's slightly crooked.
Sure.
It's the same thing. It's an obsession, if you will, with me to improve things. It's just always been. And what the other part I would say is, over the years, I got to the point of where people who worked for me 20 years ago or 30 years ago and haven't worked for me for 10 or 15 years, they still call me their boss in casual conversations. You know what I mean? And they still highly respect me. And I'm not bragging when I say I can pick out a half a dozen or a dozen people that I mentored over the years that did better than me. Mm-hmm. They have bigger businesses than I do. They've achieved more than I have. And in those days, I started getting a real kick out of just helping people and kind of taking them under my wing. And then it just sort of became an obsession after that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you've been helping people for a long time. Are there any things that you kind of pick up on that are common themes? I mean, things that you've seen over and over. I mean, earlier you mentioned some self-limiting beliefs. I know that we all have those, but are there certain things that you picked on that, well, just kind of like Tony Robbins says, he says, I've been to, 100 countries and I'd have to be an idiot if I didn't pick up on those. But what are some things you've seen?
Well, generally what I see is people don't have faith in themselves. They don't have confidence in themselves. Or if they have faith, and some people like, Tony Robbins has got like the ultimate faith in everything. But if I see they either don't have faith in themselves or confidence, or they don't have enough. And it's a fine balance between having faith and confidence and being arrogant. And you don't want to cross to the arrogant part, because then it becomes, disruptive and counterproductive. But what I've seen mostly is people that say, you think I can really do that? Yeah, I think you really can. I know one thing's for sure, you'll never know unless you try. And I would say if there was one common theme among everyone I've ever engaged with, it would be lack of confidence or a lack of faith in themselves. And the second thing would be generally people are not. Let's say they're not inclined to. And you brought up this in one of your in your email. People are not inclined to negotiate for what they want. They're inclined to negotiate for what they think they can get. There's two big different things there. And bridging the gap between what you want and what you think you can get. You forget what you think you can get. That doesn't mean a darn thing. But what I found is most people will negotiate or ask for, if you want to not be so formal about it, what they think they can get when they should be asking for what they really need. Those would be the two traits that I see commonly.
So how is it that, I mean, what do you tell people to do? Say, hey, you're going to be negotiating a salary, a deal, transaction. What, yeah, I mean, what are some guidelines that we should use to negotiate for what we need, I guess, instead of what we think we can get?
Yeah. Well, I tell people two things. One is, if you haven't read Getting to Yes by Uri and Fisher, have you heard of that book?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Uri and Fisher are Harvard professors that wrote a book called Getting to Yes, and then there was a sequel to that I can't remember what it was, but it was Getting to the Second Yes or some darn thing. But they, in those days, this is 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, they had what was called, they headed up what was called the Harvard Negotiations Project, where they took a deep dive in how successful negotiations are conducted as opposed to the unsuccessful ones. And their thesis, and this is what I tell people all the time, is don't approach it as a one-sided deal. It's not a one-sided deal. It's a two-sided deal, okay? And getting to yes requires you to understand what they want and what they need, and requires you to move around the other side of the table and sit with them and figure it is what they need. And then your strategy is much better because you understand what they really need. Most people focus on what I need. Here's what I need. Here's what I need. Here's what I need. And what I say is, you know what you need. Find out what the other side needs. And if you can find a way to give that to them, then you're going to get what you need out of the deal. And it almost always works. Now, are there times when it doesn't? I suppose so. But every deal I've ever done, and I've done some pretty major risky that no one thought could be done deals, and it's worked every time for me. In fact, I lectured at Harvard once after this super deal I did, 25 years ago. But the point I'll make is I didn't do a lecture at Harvard to the students on negotiations. I did the lecture to the law professors on negotiations.
Right.
So that's what I'd say. Approach it. Understand what the other side has to have. Don't be so focused on what you have to have. An old colleague of mine used to call it look across the pond. He drew this analogy of this guy that had some land over there on the other side of the pond, and this guy wanted to get it. I don't remember exactly how it went, but when he was looking across the pond from his place, it looked like a whole different situation or deal than when he went across the pond and looked back over his direction. It was a whole different perspective, and that's what most people don't do. They focus on what they want, and therefore they get they get what they deserve.
Yeah. No, very, very well said. So you have helped grow a lot of businesses through, the last 40 years, we've seen several different types of downturns and other interesting economic times. What are some of the things that you've done with businesses to help them grow even through those times?
Well, the answer to that would probably take a lot longer than we have time for on the podcast, but I'll skim off the top and I'll give you a couple of things. Speaking of economic times, I've been through a bunch of recessions. I've been through a bunch of downturns. I've been through a bunch of contractions in the economy, and these things are predictable. It's not like, oh my God, I can't believe there's a recession. How could there be a recession? Well, and you can predict pretty much when they're going to be, or plus or minus 3 or 4 years, and they're coming. You don't ever know how severe they'll be. No one, I think, can predict that accurately. So what I tell people in my business, be ready for the next one. What are you going to do when the next one comes? Assume that your sales will be affected by X. What do you do? Assume that it's deeper than that and you're affected by X squared. What do you do? Assume it's even deeper than that, takes you all the way down to break even. What do you do? Don't be surprised when it happens and your sales go down, because then you're in crisis mode. Then you're running around. People see you running around. You don't know what to do, and you act badly. You make rash decisions. You decide on things and maybe make cuts to programs that you shouldn't make. And that's the time that you have to be very cool and very logical about what it is you have to do. So I always tell them, be ready for the next recession. Be purposeful in it. And if you're careful about how you structure, how you behave, and what you do with your company, there's a really good chance you can come out of the recession stronger than your competition, because your competition is going to cut salespeople, they're going to cut advertising dollars, they're going to cut factory employees, they're going to cut human resource people, they're going to just hunker down and hope to get through it. What you need to do, you will need to cut some things probably, but what you want to do is you want to be smart about it. Cut things over here and then place them over here in marketing programs or advertising or product development, so you have a shot at coming out of a recession stronger than you went in it.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely key to anticipate that, right? Like Jim Rohn says that there's seasons to our lives, right? And so you know that the winter is coming. That's
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Like personally, right? I mean, that's probably great advice just for your personal income and investments too, right?
That's right. The other thing I tell people all the time is don't leave innovation up to Apple and Amazon or any of the other companies. Name any other high-tech company you want. Don't assume that you cannot be innovative and your company or you as a person can't be, because the fact is studies after studies have shown that people are inherently creative. Now, what a lot of people believe is you're either born that way, right? You're either born a creative, an Einstein type, or that's just not true. It really isn't true. Creativity is a learned skill, and it can be taught. At I wouldn't say any age, but almost any age. I tell companies, you need to get more innovative than you are right now. And I don't care if you're making dog biscuits or you're making high tech, Star Wars toys. Especially if you're on the low tech scale, you need to get more innovative. And I'll tell you why, Alton, because it's not the Chinese that are going to take everybody's jobs in the United States. It's robots and artificial intelligence. That's where the real competition is. And so if you're not out innovating how your product is made, how your product is delivered, how your product is serviced and supplied, then the robots will, won't they? Sooner or later. And you know what? The experts predict that robots will be taking surgeons' jobs by the year 2050. That's not that far away. And so when people say, no, way a robot or artificial intelligence is going to take our job, we're just too good, this is more art than science, I say, well, it may be so, but if they're going to take a surgeon's job, they're going to take yours too. So every company that isn't already innovative and creative needs to, excuse me just a second, I'm just going to put this on mute.
Sure.
Needs to go down the path of preparing to be innovative and creative. And that's not hard to do. It's a fairly long process, but it's entirely achievable for a company that is not creative to teach itself how to be that, and then to start using that creativity to produce new products and services and so forth. But every company that isn't doing that, and that's how I grow a lot of companies. I say, okay, let's take a look at what you've got here. Okay, all right, you're making dog biscuits, and the Chinese are going to get that soon. So you need to get out of dog biscuits, right? So what do you know? What markets do you know? Let's say, well, you know the dog market. Great. You know the consumer market, retail dog market. Okay, let's find some higher level, more creative product that you can, since you have the channel. You've already got the channel. You already understand that. Let's find a new high technology product that you can bring to that market and use the money you're making from the dog biscuits while you got it to fund the innovation effort. I'll give you a perfect example of this. Encyclopedia Britannica transformed itself from print to digital, right? And they had enough foresight to know that, it didn't take a rocket scientist to know that paper was going away. Right. You know what I mean? It didn't. Sure. But they used the profit from the paper business to fund the digital business, and it's arguable as to whether they'll be entirely successful at it right now. But that's the kind of forethought and planning that I think most companies need to do, and many of them don't.
Sure. So
many of them just don't.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the whole Uber, right? With the taxi cabs and all the politics now that's going around with that. Like here in Austin, it's taxi cabs are trying to they actually pushed Uber out. And anyhow, it's
instead
of innovating. I
write about Uber a lot, by the way. I write about Uber a lot, right? By the way, it's mostly because of its toxic culture. which I'm also an expert in. But you look at the business that Uber is in, right? What business are they in? Right now, they're trying to find maybe they found him already, a successor to the CEO. And they're looking at, all the wrong companies. They're in the logistics business. That's the business that they're in. And yes, it's been enabled by technology with the use of the smartphone and all that kind of stuff, but they're no different than an airline. So, and they're no better than an airline. Like maybe it's quicker and all that kind of stuff. But what I write mostly about Uber is it has very, very toxic culture, and which is not unusual for a company that grew as quickly as they did. But that's another subject.
Sure. Well, I mean, I know that you talk a lot on culture, and we talked a little bit about innovation. What are some things that you think are good to foster that innovation?
It's a good question. Actually, my fifth book, I just finished the early draft manuscript. It'll be published no later than January. It's called Metamorphosis from give me a second, the title escaped. Metamorphosis from Rust Belt to High Tech in a 21st Century World, where I basically lay out, here's how a Rust Belt company can become a high tech one.
Oh, awesome.
And I say, okay, the steps of the hard steps of actually, making a product and designing a product, and then the technology of it is really easy comparatively. The hard part is the people. And so the first 3 chapters of that book, I say, you have to build the proper foundation, organizational foundation, cultural foundation, before you can hope to develop any cool new high technology products. And I said, I have actually a system called the 7 Values of Ingenuity that I wrote about in my third book that lays out the 7 values that I think every company should have to be successful, to have a positive culture. But not every company will want to do all 7 of those. So I lay out the 3 foundational steps that you have to do first. This is your question. You have to have an organization that has respect for each other. Leaders that respect the rank and file that respect each other, rank and file that respects the leaders. If you don't have and this is what Uber does not have. They do not have a culture of respect. They don't respect their drivers. They probably don't respect each other. They may respect their customers, but they're only one part of the equation, right? You got employees in there too. You got shareholders, you got customers, you got employees. So respect has to be instilled first. Organization-wide, you must have integrity, because without integrity, nothing else works. If you don't have integrity, I can't trust you to keep your word. And therefore, when you're packing my chute, I may not jump out of that plane because I don't trust the fact that you packed my chute right. You know what I mean? That's the analogy that I use. And those would be probably the 2 most important things. And then the third one is, so you got to have those 2 first. Third one is teamwork. You can't build a great company. You can't grow a company without fabulous teamwork. And you know what? Teamwork, I hate the word. I hate it. You know why? Everybody talks teamwork. Everybody, oh boy, we got to have teamwork. boy, we got teamwork. But few people and few organizations have it. It's cool ice cream talk to talk about it. They're what they call bumper sticker values. They look good in the boardroom wall and an annual report. But most people don't have teamwork, and most organizations stack the deck against teamwork. Let me just give you an example. In almost every company you've worked for, did you get a performance appraisal?
Sure.
Right. Right? How did you do? Right? Once a year or whatever it was, right? Okay. But they want teamwork, right? So why are they evaluating you as a lone contributor when they should be, whatever's in your team, the 4 or 5 people who are in your team, they should all be evaluated as a team. And because they're only evaluating you, you don't care what the other guy's problems are, because you don't get evaluated by what he does. You get evaluated by what you do. And so companies stack the deck against teamwork. And then they say, okay, Alton, you did a good job this week, so this year we're going to give you a raise, right? Okay. And that reinforces your notion to say, I'm only going to do what's good for me. I'm not doing. Now, they may talk about we want you to be a team player here, Alton. You got to be a team player. You're thinking to yourself, you ain't paying me to be a team player, bud. Right?
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm not going
excellent.
to be a team player. So, and there's a lot of other, from hiring practices, I could go on and on about how organizations stack the deck against teamwork. But the other thing I will say is there's so many myths going on about teamwork, and I'll just give you a couple of them. In my fourth book, I think I wrote about this. I'll just give you a couple of myths. Myth number one is teams are supposed to like each other. No, they don't have to like each other. They have to respect each other, right? Respect. There's that word respect again. You have to respect each other, but let's face it, you get in any team, unless it's your basketball buddies, you don't like everybody in the team, do you?
Right.
No,
right.
Nobody does.
Sure.
Some people don't like you, but they don't have to. But the problem with that myth in regards to teamwork is people think, well, if I don't like somebody on the team, we can't be a team. That's not true at all. Another popular myth, and this is probably the most dangerous one, is that teams shouldn't have conflict. Now, have you worked in a place where when there's an argument ready to come up, I'll call it an argument, people go, let's take this offline. We'll take this offline. We're not going to talk about, oh boy, don't let the boss know there's any conflict here. Oh my God, the boss probably doesn't like conflict either. Popular myth about teams is they're free of conflict. Not only are effective teams not free of conflict, you want them to have conflict. You should encourage conflict. You should promote conflict. You should inject conflict if you have to get it, because conflict is what drives the best decisions, isn't it? The worst decisions are made by, what do they call it? It was the Bay of Pigs invasion, the mental state of everyone sitting around agreeing with each other for the sake of agreeing with each other. I can't remember the name. That was the whole reason Bay of Pigs invasion failed. You get a group of people together, and if they're all agreeing on something, then you don't have enough diversity of view. Sure. You don't have enough diversity of education. You don't have enough diversity of experience. So and people have to be taught conflict resolution skills. Okay, so you say, I want conflict. I got it, Blue. I want conflict in this team. Right, okay. But if it's unbridled and unmanaged conflict, all people will do is hate each other, and they'll get nothing done. So you have to teach the team conflict resolution skills. Here's what a conflict looks like. Here's the proper way to engage in a conflict. Here's an improper way to engage in a conflict. Here's what you do when a conflict arises. Here's how you use that conflict for productive purposes. And so you teach them the basic fundamentals of how to do that. And then you say, okay, if you've done all that and you got a conflict you can't resolve, before you start punching each other out, call me. It's my job to resolve the conflicts that you guys can't. But it's your job to resolve most of the conflicts that will come up.
Oh, that's
the third fundamental value that companies have to have. You don't have superb teamwork, you don't stand a chance of growing.
There's so much wisdom in what you're saying. I love it. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. Is there anything special that you want to leave our listeners with?
I do, because I saw your profile was like 25 to 40 roughly of your audience. Okay. This is especially for the younger people, but it's true for anybody. Work harder than the guy sitting next to you. Always work harder than him. Stay longer than him. Come in before he does. Leave after he leaves. Study harder than he does. Ask for more assignments than he does. Outwork and outwork and outwork and outwork and outwork. Make yourself so valuable to your employer that they couldn't possibly do without you. And if you do that, not only will your career soar, but when the next recession comes, you ain't going to be the guy that gets cut out. Because you've made yourself invaluable to them. What millennials tend to do today, and a lot of other people too, but millennials tend to be, they have a different mindset. They're more lifestyle centered than they are organization centered. I understand that. But if you want to really have a career that soars, you're going to need, unless you're working for a company in Austin or a company in the Silicon Valley, you're going to need to be a little more on the side of putting out more than you really want to or than you think you should. And then if you're not rewarded in kind by your employer, then you got the wrong company. You should go find another one, because there are plenty of companies want to hire a guy like that. Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It reminds me of Seth Godin talks about a linchpin.
Yep. I think he stole my idea. I mean, I have to sue him for that.
Well, yeah, no, I think that you're right. And I think that, that's a lot of what this podcast is really about, right? I mean, we kind of sell it on the idea of making money and making lives better. But at the end of the day, in order to do that, we all have to become more, and we all have to.
That's a good point.
Become more valuable point. And working hard is a good way to do it.
Yeah, I'm blessed that I came from a hard work ethic family, and I don't know any other way to be. Some people do. I just don't. When I'm not working on the business, I'm thinking about working on the business. That's just the way it's 24. I was just with my doctor here an hour ago getting my annual physical. And he goes, you need to, you telling me you're always thinking about the business? I said, yep. Unless I'm dead asleep or dead, I'm always thinking about the business or always working. That's just, and that's what you need to be if you want to be a CEO or you want to have a stellar career. Can't give it half throttle.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. You really,
it's my pleasure.
Really have so much wisdom, and I hope that myself as well as you who are listening have picked up on half of that, and we'll definitely be moving up.
Well, great. My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve.
You bet.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview with Steve Blue. I sure took a lot away from it. If you want to check him out, you can go to StephenLBlue.com. That's Stephen with a V, lblue.com. You can find out more information about him. But let's get to my key takeaways. First thing is 10X. We talked about Grant Cardone. If you're not reading some of his stuff and checking out what he's doing, I think he's a great person to follow, to get inspired, to really, really milk the most out of life. Great guy. The other thing that I want to mention, some of the things that Steve said were how a lot of what he sees is that people do not believe in themselves. And I can agree with that just from my own experience. I remember when one of my mentors said, Alton, you're going to be a millionaire. You just don't have the money yet, but it's going to happen. And honestly, in that moment, it was just like, oh yeah, it is going to happen. And I was kind of struggling with some of the things that we talked about, those limiting beliefs, not exactly having the faith to know that it will happen. Maybe not understanding exactly how you're going to get there, but to just to have that faith. And so I think it's great to have faith in other people, to inspire other people, but don't stop there. You have to have those beliefs yourself. But those are the beliefs that successful people have and foster. The other thing that I want to point out that he talked about is just outworking everyone else. And if you want to get further down the road, you have to be willing to put in the time. You have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be willing to read the books, to have the experiences, to go try for that deal, and to to bring terrible negotiating skills to the table, and then learn, and then do it again, and to just ignore that failure. Don't get discouraged. Keep having that faith and keep your head down and keep grinding. So I hope that you will think about how these things can improve your life. And I hope that you're really motivated to think more about pursuing your own greatness and becoming more successful. I want you to take action right now.